Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Napoleon and today we're back with another Enlisted video. And this time we're going to be doing Tier 3 Germany for a tech tree guide and what you should get. Of course, this video has been made possible for the friends at Discord, meaning if you haven't liked, subscribed, or joined Discord, I highly suggest that you do. But that said, let's get started with Tier 3. Before we even touch Tier 3, we have to finish Tier 2. Because in my last video, I realized Enlisted did not really do a good job of categorizing their weapons, or should I say, categorizing and putting where their weapons. For example, I said the VG-15 is at Tier 2 when it actually is at Tier 3. But when I was looking at the tech tree itself, the VG-15 is at Tier 2. Same thing goes for the Kar-98K with the grenade launcher, and therefore I'm gonna cover up the last two weapons that should be in Tier 2 but are labeled in Tier 3 for some reason. These are the MP38 and the MP40. Of course, the big issue that I see right now is that you guys, mostly the player base, will still have to grind through the MP3008, the OVP 1918, and the FNAP 43 to get the MP38, which in my opinion is a better version of the MP40, so that's gonna be that. Said, let's finally move on to Tier 3. Starting up, we have the VG2. This is a Gewehr 43 magazine put into a VG2, which is pretty good in my opinion for bolt-action rifles. I mean, it's a pretty good weapon, except for the fact that by Tier 3 you really should be getting the semi-automatic rifles, such as the Gewehr 41. This Gewehr 41 is the Walter design, and it fires 10 rounds. Of course, those 10 rounds, specifically for this weapon, is in two 5-round clips, meaning that if you have to load your gun, you have to put in 5 clips and then another 5 clips. At first, this seems unusual, but it is actually pretty useful in terms of emergency situations. But that said, that is the Gewehr 41, a very solid semi-automatic rifle. Moving on, we have the snipers. This comes in with the Katakano M91 with a scope mount. This is essentially the exact same Katakano M91 that we have in Tier 2 with the Katakano 1891. This time it's just with a sniper scope. And in my opinion, the sniper scope isn't anything good. If you want a good sniper, once again, go back to Tier 1 and get the Kar-98K. You also have the Gewehr 98. This is a Gewehr 98 with essentially almost pretty much the exact same sniper scope as the Kar-98K. Hence, why you should be getting it is beyond me. At this point, I would also have to suggest that you should get the Kar-98K with the grenade launcher, because that thing is pretty good. You actually get two Kar-98K with grenade launchers. One is with the anti-tank grenade launcher, which I highly suggest that you do not get, and the regular grenade launcher, which I highly suggest that you get. That said, let's move on to assault weapons, which is a little bit of a mishmash, because right after the MP38, you get the Beretta M1. This is actually a Tier 3 weapon, whereas the MP38 is a Tier 2 weapon, which I've discussed. And following that, you have the MP40. So, in order to get your first Tier 3 assaulter weapon, you have to get the Beretta M1. The Beretta M1 itself is actually a pretty decent weapon. As a matter of fact, I think it's a better version of the MP40. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, it is much more accurate, and it has 10 more rounds, which in times of need is actually quite decent. Moving on to other weapons in Tier 3, we have the ZK383. This is actually labeled at Tier 4, which you have to grind for the MP40 and then you can get this weapon. But in short, this is a durable weapon that uses pistol cartridges, that uses a 30-round magazine, and fires in semi or fully automatic. It has a vertical recoil of 34, and a rate of fire of 660, which is, in my opinion, an upgrade of the MP40. And then after that, you have the MP35-1, also labeled right after the ZK383 at Tier 4. This is essentially a better version of the ZK383 with hit power of 6 and a rate of fire of 540, and has a 32-round magazine, and it has pretty low vertical and horizontal recoil. By now, your question is, which do I get? The ZK383, the MP35-1, or the Beretta M1? In my opinion, if you want to save up cash, I highly suggest that you get the Beretta M1, or the ZKZ-383. Honestly, those two weapons are very good. The rate of fire on the ZKZ is particularly noticeable, and it has a bipod, which could be useful in some cases. And of course, we have the Beretta M3841, which is essentially, in my opinion, practically the exact same thing as the Beretta M1, so I highly suggest that you just get the Beretta M1 if you want to use the Beretta M1. But in terms of heavy weapons, we have the ZB26, we have the MG34. And that's that for heavy weapons. In my opinion, I highly suggest that you do not use the ZB26 and just use the MG34. Why? Because the MG34 is much better. And after that, we have the Flamethrower, the Flammable FF35, as a Flamethrower. Should you use this squad? In my opinion, yes, because it's a very good squad. Of course, at tier 3, you have a lot of good squads, so I really highly suggest that you take your time and suggest which squad you should get. And then after that, we have the Panzerfaust. This Panzerfaust, in my opinion, is one of the best anti-tank weapons at its tier, because not only can it take out any tank, in my opinion, it can also take out the even heavier tanks at tier 5. So get this anti-tank weapon. It's really good. That said, let's move on to tanks, and we only have 3 in this case. Starting with the first tank, we have the Stug 3F. This is essentially a German anti-tank weapon mounted on a Stug. And is this good? The answer is yes. But is it good as the next one? My opinion is no. The next tank that we have is the Panzer IV F2. This is essentially a German Panzer IV mounted with a long barrel 75mm gun. Do I suggest that you use it? Maybe, because the next tank is the Panzer IV-J. Now this tank is pretty much acts similar to the Panzer III-N that we have at tier 2. The big difference is that the 75mm gun is elongated, and it has more rounds, it has more armor, and most notably, like the Panzer III-N, it also has a machine gun on the commander's cupola, which is very useful sometimes. That said, in terms of tanks, I only suggest that you get the Panzer IV-J. That said, moving on to tier 3 planes, you already have a few planes that you can get. These come with the BF-110 series, such as the C7, the F2, and the G2. In my personal opinion, the most fun plane in this list is the G2. However, if you like a more conventional plane with bombs and cannons and whatnot, I highly suggest that you get the BF-110 C7 or F2. If you really are short on cash, just get the C7. However, by this point you should be getting every weapon so you can progress. Therefore, it is really up to you to get the C7 or the G2. The G2, in my opinion, is much more fun. It has rockets, which at this tier is quite interesting. And it has 30mm and 37mm cannons, which is very good. That said, we have the BF-109 F4 Tropical. This is essentially a BF-109 in the tropical format, and that's that. Moving on, we have the Focke-Wulf 190A4 at tier 3. So that's going to be good. In my opinion, it's a pretty good plane. Honestly, I just wouldn't use this plane against enemy tanks because it has no armament. And of course, once again, Enlisted has mislabeled the Fiat G55 at tier 3 when it's supposed to be at tier 4. Said, this is all it for the weapons. Said, let's go on to what I suggest that you bring. For one, you can either bring the SK383, which is actually what I suggest, or the MP35-1, which is also what I suggest. I don't really suggest that you bring the Beretta M1 at this point, because at tier 3, you really need fast fire rate weapons. Now, the Beretta M1 is a very good weapon in my opinion, but I personally just get the SK383. Moving on, in terms of rifles, you only have one choice with the Gewehr 41, or you can also bring the Kar 98K grenade launcher, and essentially give impact grenades on your infantrymen. That said, moving on, we have the MG34 for your heavy machine gunners, and that's that. Do I suggest that you get the flamethrower? Really depends, because at this point, like I listed, you have the assaulter squad, you have essentially a radio operator squad, which I still suggest that you highly use, you have a machine gun squad, which you can swap out for a flamethrower squad, don't get me wrong, and you have tank slot or plane slot. Personally, at tier 3, I highly suggest that you get the tanks, because the tanks are actually pretty good for Germany. So, to recap, you can either bring a soldier squad, which I suggest is a must, radio operator squad, which I suggest as a must, machine gun squad, half-track squad, or flamethrower squad, of which it is really up to you to what you decide to bring. So that's that. And you can either decide to bring a tank or a plane. My personal suggestion is to bring a tank. That said, let's move on to the perks. In terms of infantrymen, once again, I highly suggest that you get the following. These are going to be the plus 75% medic pack usage speed, vitality, which is actually very, very good, and most importantly, minus 40% firearm vertical recoil, which is actually very, very good. That said, in terms of tankers, the perks that I suggest include change the type of ammunition without losing a reload progress perk for the loader, and plus 20% tank gun reload speed for the loader perk, which is also pretty good. Of course, we have the planes, which is pretty simple in my opinion, and that is minus 60% damage when hard landing with a parachute. That said, to recap the entire section of Tier 3, highly suggest that you bring an assaulter squad with either the ZK-353 or the MP-35-1, a machine gun squad, or a flamethrower squad, or a half-track squad, really depends on you at this point, and a radio operator squad, and a tank squad. Of course, your infantrymen should be given the Gewehr 41, and your tank should be the Panzer IV-J, and your plane, if you decide to bring a plane, it can be either the Bf-110C7 or the Bf-110G2. In terms of Tier 3, honestly personally suggest that you either avoid this, and that is because Tier 3 has the unfortunate ability to tier up against Tier 4s and 5s, or tier downs against 1s and 2s. But, in my opinion, from my point of view, Enlisted actually has a pretty good job of balancing Tier 3 with the ability to just go face against other Tier 3s, which, in my opinion, is actually very, very good. So, that's Enlisted for you. It actually has balanced out Tier 3 against Tier 3s, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. That said, that's all it for Tier 3 Germany. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the Discord, and I'll see you in the next one.